That's why they say that the first dollar is the hardest dollar, but the second one's a hell of a lot easier. So how do you get on a stage? What's the process?
One foot after the other.
Yeah, thank you for that. Or you could jump two at a time, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
It's like a lot of other things in my way of doing things is when I opened my business, I wasn't like, okay, I'm going to open a pawn shop and holy cow, there's 1,001 things I have to do to get that shop open, and I'm going to worry about every single one of them right now. Like that's going to get you nowhere, and that's going to get you frozen. Thinking about getting on stage, like how scared you're going to be, and where you're going to go stand, and what the audience is going to be saying or thinking. You can't do all that. Like in both of those scenarios, break it down. I both the scenarios I actually wrote down everything that needed to be done up until the end of the performance or the end of opening the business. And then I would just look at the step in front of me. And that's exactly what I would do. And I would stop thinking about everything past that. I'd be like, it's already written down. It's already planned. It's already out there. There's no reason for me to worry about that because my list says I don't have to worry about it yet.
Right.
I think that's allowed me to get over a lot of my fears or do a lot of the things that I've done.
And so back to that, starting that business, it brings up the question: if you were telling, based on what you lived, well, let me back up. When somebody goes to start a new business, I believe that you have to burn the ships. You gotta. There's no halfway starting a business for me, right? I want to do a business part time. That's legitimate, and I'm going to keep my job, and I'm going to do this. But you got to understand what the ramifications of that are going to be, and the chances of you being successful are greatly reduced. I also say that people have no idea what they're capable of. I think I see a whole lot more in most everybody else than they see in themselves, simply because I come from abject poverty and I've gotten where I have, and so I see what the possibilities are. And when somebody's going to go out there, and let's say you're going to be a comedian. Man, if you got something to fall back on, if you're not down to that 2% of your financial reserves, I don't know that you learn the lessons the same way. And those lessons for me are so important. And it sounds like in your startup, that's what it was also.
Yeah, I do think there's other ways to learn the lessons, though. I don't know that you necessarily need to, be climbing out of the dumpster. You know what I mean? I don't know that you need to be at the bottom. The bottom of whatever you're doing in order to make it to the top. Because if I just went into just with the acting and stuff, there's no bottom there. In my head there was, but in reality there wasn't. There wasn't actually something horrible that was going to happen if I got on that stage and nobody laughed, which happens.
Right.
Which happens all the time. Yeah. And same with the businesses. I'm sure there's a lot of successful people out there that didn't have to go through a super rough period. They just naturally had the ability to know what to do and did it right.
Well, I think the point here is that I'm sure there are, right? There's always, it's like I say about app developers. Yes, go develop your app, but just understand I don't know what it is. It's some huge number of apps that fail every single day to the one that gets sold, to the one WhatsApp, there's a million non-apps. And I think in that context, from a business perspective, I don't know anybody that didn't go through a rough patch. I know lots of business owners, and most all of them struggle until you hit your maturity level. You get maybe into your later 30s, your early 40s, and you really start to have an idea what business is like. That's starting from scratch, and so without really any help or any guidance. And so that's where the question comes from relative to starting your pawn shop and kind of being down to that 2%. For me, that's where all of my lessons were learned, when we were at that 2%. It's hard to learn those lessons when you're at 78% and everything's going great. But man, when we got down to that 2%, I started to pay attention and do things that I had never done before. It's in that context that I'm asking you, what was that like? Would you say that is that at a point where you really figured out what you were doing wrong and doing right, or at least you were a lot more open to learning about it, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I think that was when it turned around was where I gained confidence. Because I had written out, when I got the loans from the bank and I wrote the business plan, I'd written out like where I thought I would be and what the situation with the money was going to be and these numbers here. And while the numbers were different than what I had anticipated, the end result of the numbers was exactly where I thought it was going to be. I knew I was going to be down to 2 to 5% of my cash at that point. Like still getting there, I was like, oh, fuck, my world's going to end and
Right,
this is going to
right.
work out. But when it did turn around at that point and I made it, yeah, I mean, that was, it's very reassuring and gave me a lot more confidence moving forward that, I didn't just pull the numbers out of my ass. I knew what I was doing. Like, and I got to
Right.
be confident that that's what I was doing. And I got to speak confidently that I knew what I was doing and I know what I'm doing in the future.
That's why they say, and I agree. That's why they say that the first dollar is the hardest dollar, but the second one's a hell of a lot easier. When you know how the money works, when you know how the game's played in the process, it's a hell of a lot easier to make money than that first dollar.